structure here is an office building and continues to be an office building. It does contain a liquor store in half of it now, but it was not, the abatement was not granted to the liquor store, nor is that liquor store a freestanding unit. And again, the resolution reserves no requirement that a liquor store or any other prohibited facility, quote unquote, could go in and be grounds to revoke the abatement. In fact, the resolution only requires and says that the council shall grant the abatement to Mr. Whitaker for so long as he meets the required employment thresholds and files the required verification of employment with the city, which I understand he's continued to do. I don't think that's in dispute, and I understand he's also comfortably exceeding the dollar amount and employment requirements in the forms. So based upon the resolution alone and without considering anything else, it would appear as though, based both upon what I think is applicable law, though reasonable attorneys can disagree, and the published notice the city's put on its website, the abatement should continue in full force and effect for 10 years, so long as Mr. Whitaker continues to file and meet their file requisite forms and meet the employment thresholds. The second issue is that I think the interpretation of the statute that is being called into question here is difficult, and I understand that, I understand the city's position, or at least the position that resulted in setting this hearing, but I think that it's ambiguous, and ambiguity in a statute is generally going to be resolved in a way that restricts the property owner's use of a property the least. And so if we look at the language of the statute, it says that the abatement can't be granted to a facility, and then it defines facility as essentially freestanding things like golf courses and tennis clubs, things that house entire parcels of real estate. The only place that the statute contemplates that we could have a split facility is talking about certain types of establishments, and then it says you can still grant an abatement to those types of establishments as long as those establishments are not the primary use of the facility. So here, if we look at primary use by what's important in the resolution, which is the employment figures that we're meeting, the primary use, the employment driver here is the office that houses Mr. Whitaker's business next to the liquor store. It's generating more in actual tax dollars from an income standpoint, more employees, more wages. So I think that if we look at the intent of the statute, which is to drive development and employ people, and we say, well, which of these two businesses has the largest impact on your community? It's the office facility, not the liquor store. So I think if we looked at the statute and said, well, how do we resolve the ambiguity? Well, let's see how it does it in this other place that's not directly applicable to the liquor store. We can see that where a facility is otherwise conforming but has a non-conforming use, it still qualifies for the abatement as long as the conforming use is the driver of the facility, which I think is the case here. And I don't think that there's been any reasonable dispute over those facts either. Again, I'm happy to answer any questions. I think that the other place that we can look, just finally, is if you look at the statute and you go on to subsection or to section 5.1 of the same statute, it talks about what needs to happen to maintain an abatement, and it actually says the exact same thing that your resolution says. Once it's granted, you just have to keep filing the forms. It doesn't say that it can be removed for doing something else, and I can't find any authority under which we can remove an abatement that's been granted simply because there's a partial non-conforming use later. I think that touchstone is when we authorize the abatement, everybody acting in good faith, office building goes up. I don't think there's any authority to remove the abatement based upon anything that I've been able to find anyway. I agree that the statute's ambiguous, could probably be better drafted, but it seems like both the contract being the resolution and applicable law shade in favor of leaving the abatement in place. I think obviously the contract is the stronger argument. The statute's ambiguous. I think that would lend itself to resolving this in favor of Mr. Whitaker simply because the contract's clear. If anybody has any questions, given that you didn't have the letter in your packets, I'm happy to answer those. I understand that was probably a lot of legal mumbo jumbo that you may or may not have followed, but I would be happy to try to break it down if you have any questions.
Copy of that resolution I can look at.
I've got one here if you need one. I think I've only got one though.
I can give it back. I'd just like to take a look at the resolution, if that's right. wasn't was it the CF1, weren't those attached with these?
Yeah.
So I don't see that in this. So that's a critical piece of it as well, right?
Are you talking about the
Yeah,
application?
that's part of the resolution.
Question out of that?
Well, I guess the question, I mean, in the CF1, it says it's for a medical center, and I think we all know why that didn't happen, but I think that's part of the resolution as well. That's kind of overlooked in your statements, but I think we all understand what happened, but to sit here and say that, it conforms with everything in the resolution, it doesn't. So, I mean, I think that statement's inaccurate. I'm not a lawyer, and that's why we pay one, so I'll let him kind of speak for us. But that is one, I mean, I think we all understand, I think we'd like to grant the abatement, but at the same time, I feel like we're going to default to what our legal counsel asks us to do as well.
Sure.
Well,
So.
and if the council would like, I'm happy to sound or give my 2 cents to what Mr. Cooley has raised as an argument, which I think is a novel legal argument. I do. However, I believe that at least my interpretation of the statutory scheme, which is also colored by conversations that I had with the Department of Local Government and Finances Council prior to bringing this issue to you, is that there is a continuing and ongoing statutory requirement for an annual update to a request for an abatement. So statutorily, once you ask for an abatement and are granted an abatement, you then have an annual requirement to bring forth a new SB1 every year that is to determine whether or not, under that statement of benefits, you are still in compliance with what the project was intended to be. What this body and what prompted this hearing was this body made a determination that as the designating body under the statutory scheme, that the current SB1 that Mr. Whitaker filed in 2020 is no longer in compliance because it is not a medical building. It is something else. This hearing is then given as an opportunity for Mr. Whitaker and or his counsel or anyone else to be able to come present evidence as to why this should not occur, or to provide evidence as to why he has made either reasonable efforts to be in compliance or that there are extenuating circumstances beyond his control. That being said, I don't know that the resolution as a contractual argument, while I think it is a very interesting legal argument, I don't think it fits fully within the statutory scheme, and I don't think it would fit within the DLGF's interpretation of that particular statutory scheme. That being said, I would also note to all of you that there is an appellate procedure beyond this hearing that would give Mr. Whitaker an opportunity to pose that legal argument at the circuit court, and the circuit court could determine whether or not that argument meets either the legal requirement or the statutory requirement to say that he has made a reasonable effort towards compliance and or that there are extenuating circumstances that are outside of his control. Of the things that Mr. Whitaker or Mr. Cooley has set forth, it would appear that his argument, at least in part, is that the substantial compliance of the bill, or the compliance of the building by putting something other than a liquor store in the same structure makes what is essentially a non-conforming use a conforming use, and that is by and of its nature a reasonable effort to be in compliance. That is for you all to decide. So procedurally, the way that this occurs is you've already made a determination that it is not in compliance. He has had an opportunity at a public hearing, or will after this public hearing, to present his case. At the next opportunity, which in this case would be your November meeting, you can either vote that he has shown reasonable efforts and he is in compliance, or you can determine that he has not, in which case you will have to pass a resolution terminating his tax abatement for failure to comply with the requirements in the SB1. So I just wanted to kind of lay that out procedurally. As far as what my legal opinion is that it's a liquor store. And if it weren't a liquor store, we wouldn't be having this issue, we wouldn't be having this conversation. There's only like 12 or 13 types of buildings that can't be abated. And that is one of them. So when it was a medical building, and medical professional services, that is not one of those 13 buildings, those 13 things. So that is where you're at now. As to whether or not there is reasonable effort or substantial compliance, that is for you all to decide. That is not for me to say.
Can I start? So first of all, you said that we decided. The abatement committee made a decision. The city council members did not make a decision yet. Did I miss something? Is that correct?
No, in the meeting where we voted on abatements, you voted to revoke that abatement after the tax abatement committee met.
In June, probably.
And then that is where this hearing comes, because you were notified that the abatement was revoked, and then this transpires.
Right. Well, we did have a question about it. We did ask for proof. We wanted proof.
Of?
And we got opinions or translations of what you thought the law to be.
I don't know what type of proof all I can give you is my legal interpretation, which
Right,
is all he can
right,
give.
and that's right. It's in interpretation. Go ahead.
I just wanted to offer just a very brief response. I mean, obviously there's more than one in legal interpretation. That was part of my presentation. I tend to think that the resolution matters more. I mean, again, I'm not trying to hold anybody anything on a website, but it seems that the city thinks that the resolution matters. I understand the office building is a medical office building on the CF1, and I'm going to ask Mr. Whitaker to come up and just kind of describe the circumstances that resulted in him needing to go in this direction with the use of the building. But I think Mr. Stephen also said it doesn't matter that it's not a medical office building, at least in his opinion, or I think in the abatement committee's opinion. The issue is just that rather than it being a medical office building, there's a liquor store in half of it. I think if that were not the case, even if it were just a regular office building, like if Mr. Whitaker used the entire thing for his business rather than having a liquor store in half, I don't think we'd be here. So I don't think that the statement on the CF1 for the medical office building is I mean, and I'm going to say as material as maybe we think it is, but I also think that if you look at the CF1, it says that the primary purpose of the building is to drive economic growth. That's why the abatement was granted. Put a building here, put business here, generate growth in the area, and I don't think it's disputed that the building has done that. And then the other thing that I wanted to say is, yes, we can decide there's been substantial compliance. The committee also has the council also has the ability to decide the amount of the reduction of the abatement. So you could even decide that we're not in compliance by the way that I read the resolution, and you could decide that the reduction is 0. And the statute gives you that same authority and discretion. 5.1 that I cited earlier says the exact same thing. Even if somebody doesn't wholly comply with the requirements of the statute, you still have the ability to leave the abatement in place or to decide how much it should be reduced. So you could decide it should be a reduction, but not a complete reduction. And the resolution reserves that right in you as well. So that, just brief response, I didn't mean to cut you off, I'm sorry.
No, that's fine.
Maybe I don't want to speak for everybody on the council. Me or what, I don't know, okay. But I think most of us are of the opinion, we understand what happened and why it happened. And if it was anything other than a liquor store, we wouldn't be having, we would have worked through this and made this happen. I think the fact that it's a packaged liquor store, which is by Indiana code, it says we can't do it. And that's the concern that I have. I just don't want to make sure that we're passing a resolution that's a violation of Indiana code. And, you know, if that's not the case, then I think we're on a whole different subject. But we do have to comply with the law, and that's the concern. I think that's the question.
Sure.
And I need to feel comfortable with what, you know, what the law is before we make a decision to pass a resolution if it's not legal per Indiana code.
Sure, and I'm not, I think that we have more than one reasonable interpretation of the statute. I don't think that Mr. Stevens' interpretation is wrong per se. I can find no judicial opinion on this at all. I mean, I think it's ambiguous because read in totality, I don't think it leads to just one conclusion. I think that reasonable people can disagree. And so unfortunately, this is one where we'd all like a black and white answer, but there's not really one here. And so I do think, you know, substantial compliance comes into play, particularly when there's some ambiguity. But I certainly understand your point of view. I couldn't disagree with it because I can see how you can read the statute and think, I think that it means it can't be a liquor store at all. That's not necessarily my interpretation. My interpretation is that it's ambiguous. But I'm not gonna argue with your interpretation, put it that way.
I think this would be a question probably for Mr. Whitaker.
Yeah, and I'm gonna call him up now because I would like to put on the record a little bit why the building, so I'll let him answer the question.
Yes, sir. Jeff, in the building that the abatement is on, percentage-wise, how much space does the liquor store take up and the office space?
It's probably 40-60, maybe 45-55, I don't know exact, but I know that it's a little less than half. The office is.
The office a little less than half.
Yeah.
Okay. That's all. Thank you.
I have a question, if you could explain percentage-wise how much wages are paid on the office side versus the liquor store side.
It's probably, it changes a bit. There are 4 employees on the beverage house side that range 15 to 19. And there are 3, 4, 5 of us on the other side. Yeah, and that ranges anywhere from 27 up to mine, which is frankly nobody's business.
And then if you can also, just for purposes of the record, I know we all know why you put the businesses in there that you did, but if you can just explain the circumstances just for a second.
Well, as Jamie said, I mean, everybody knows, I tried, Brian Robbins brought some people out to try to make it a restaurant when I couldn't get anything signed, you know, and I tried with a couple of different eye doctors and a group from Wilmington that was part of one of the doctors. The skin doctor that's dermatologist that's, you know, came out, we went through, did drawings, gave it to their architects to try and redesign a few, you know, part of the space before we drywall, trying to get the ink signed, get the deal done. And it just never could get it done. And then as time kept going and everything crashed, I had to do something. I had a 7-figure building in the air that I agreed to put in the air. And upon not doing it, had I not received an abatement because of the cost of the tax and the burden that would have to do such a thing. And as you all know, I did 4 of them at the same time. The Shell Station, the Big Sky Steakhouse, this office building, and my office building. All 4 of them were in the air. The millions of dollars I agreed to spend, I spent. The only thing I'm asking is to, and then, you know, just follow through, do what you can, and do what's, in my opinion, what's right to fulfill our agreement. The state's, as it's been pointed out by both attorneys, pretty much it's ambiguous. but also in the, at the end of the day, you're the lawmakers here. You're the ones that have the authority to decide this, one way or the other. It ain't got nothing to do with whether the State House is gonna be upset or not. Even in the thing that's online, there's a line in there that's, that you all have put in there on the documentation that you put out as a guideline, as your new guidelines, whatever, I forget what it's called there exactly, but the new guidelines for the abatements, that at the end of the day, you've got it in black and white, that you essentially can make the decision yourself, either direction. And so I'm not sure who drafted that, but that statement is in there. So, do you just bring this up and highlight? So, yeah, if you got it.
Any other questions for Mr. Cooley or Mr. Whitaker or Mr. Stephen?
I have some comments.
Okay.
One, I for one am thankful that Mr. Whitaker invests his own money in the city of Greensburg. Two, we dealt with this whole COVID thing, and the statute, you know, states in there things beyond our control. COVID is one of those. The other thing is I find kind of odd, maybe not odd, but I don't know that any package store, liquor store, tobacco store, or any place like that was required to close during COVID. It was an essential business. And the other statement I have is that the package store did not ask for the abatement. The abatement was on the structure. So that's where I stand on that, because, and if we're not breaking any laws, and if it's an interpretation of a law by different people, I'd made the comment to Josh, there's different interpretations of the Bible. That's why there's so many different religions. So interpretations, if we're not breaking the law, then I think we need to look at Jeff's track record and the money that he's invested within the city, and we need to do the right things.
Yes, I don't disagree with a lot of what you said. I really don't. I'm just asking. I don't know that we grant an abatement on a building ever. It's always asked what the use of the building is on the SP1 or the CF1. I think that's always on there.
Well, this was granted on 100% speculation.
I know.
When we was at the abatement committee, I stated that, as I did later on as well, that this is purely speculation.
I'm just
And
making
the abatement was put forth at that time. Basically, put it in the air and let's hope they come. Hope it happens, and if it does, that's great. And I'd have been tickled to death because I already had it framed up, and the insides I had to redo, which cost even more money to go back and redo it because, again, there comes a point in time when you're doing this, I've got to satisfy the mortgage that's coming. And the 7-figure mortgage had to be, or the 7-figure building had a mortgage that I had to get out of construction mode, you know, so.
I guess I just wanted to make the comment though. We don't grant an abatement on a building or a structure. We grant it on what's going in there, and then we grant the renewals based on what's in there.
You granted it on the 5 employees that I said that would be in there, and that's what's there, plus some.
Granted it on the employees and the fact that it was a medical center. We granted it on all those counts that are on that CF1.
There was never any promise of any doctor showing up. I said that from the beginning.
That's what's on your CF1 that you requested the abatement from, is what I'm saying, Jeff. So we granted the abatement with the understanding that's what's coming. Completely understand why things changed. So, but I'm saying I just want to make the comment, we can't say that we granted abatement on a building, because we've never just granted an abatement on building a structure and saying, okay, here's the abatement. Am I wrong? Maybe I'm asking the question. Are we aware of any abatements we've given on a building or a structure? It's always requested what the building or the structure's for. So I think I just want to make, that's an important distinction. We can't say we granted it. We never granted an abatement on a building or a structure. We granted it based on what we assumed it was going to be. We understand why it's not that, and I think, I want to give you an abatement, but I don't want to violate any of the code.
And so maybe that shows the problem with speculation abatements too, as a long-term solution.
Well, and what I would say is, you can't grant an abatement on a particular business, you're granting it on what is the
Real property,
request.
that's what the abatement is
Well, the
for.
abatement's on the real property, and the real property can't contain these 13 things.
Right, that's what I was gonna ask. Do you know what 13 things cannot be abated?
I know that what things cannot be asked for an abatement when you start. And I did not ask for abatement for any of those 13 things when we started.
I wasn't on the abatement board when this started.
I was, Jamie was, and whoever else was on there at the time. I think it was Glenn. I think Dan sat in, and I'm not sure who else, if there was any others. But regardless, that was never asked. I never asked for that. And they did not grant one for them. It was granted on the sole purpose of Jeff being willing to spend another 7 figures on putting sticks in the air out there. Because when this happened, there was no Big Sky, there was no Shell station, there was no travel plaza, there wasn't my steel office building that Haggerty's helped me with. This building didn't exist, you know. None of that was there.
Jeff, I apologize, I should probably know the answer to this, but I don't. What else is on this parcel besides this building? Okay, so the parcel was what was specifically identified in the SB1, the CF1 and the subsequent SB1. And I certainly understand why Jeff is here doing what he's doing, but you cannot even if there is some ambiguity in the statute, you cannot misinterpret that there is a requirement of an annual compliance analysis. I mean, the statute is written that way. I mean, do you agree with me?
I agree, but actually the statute doesn't actually revisit use in the annual compliance, only employment. And
But it
again,
does revisit what's in the SB1, the statement of benefits. is filed.
Actually, it doesn't. It actually says that you have to refile, but that you're only considering the employment figures. So you're not actually, there's nothing in the statute that says that you have to revisit the use. That's what I mean. I mean, I'm not, if this whole thing were a liquor store, I might be making the same argument, quite frankly. I'm not trying to make that because I don't have to, but if you look at it, it is that ambiguous. And I'm not, you know, it seems like I was looking at it again today and I was like, it seems like what the state really cares about and what you all really care about, and appropriately so, is let's get revenue generated, let's develop these areas that need to be developed, and let's pay people in our local community money to work there so they reinvest that money in our community. And it seemed to me that that's the thrust of the resolution too, and I don't think the resolution was poorly drafted. I've seen a lot of them. They all look the exact same. They just don't talk about the use. And yes, they incorporate the CF1, they incorporate the SB1 by reference, but there's not any part of the statute that requires you to look at that part of it again. Once you've, and I also think to the point of this was not approved for a liquor store, it wasn't applied for as a liquor store. The statute says you shall not grant an abatement for these facilities, but if you look at the rest of the facilities, golf course, tennis club, things that, I mean, you don't put a golf course and a liquor store in the same parcel, right? But if you look at things that go in strip malls, like restaurants, retail establishments, those are all, well, let's look and see whether that's the primary use of the, and if you look, and then again, I come back to the statute and I say, well, what do we mean by primary use? Is it physical space? Or is it how many people we're employing? Well, it seems like the rest of the statute's talking about generating growth through employment and meeting these employment numbers rather than physical space. So that's why I think, you know, again, if it's 95% one thing, 5% the other, maybe physical space matters more, but here we're looking at what's generating the best return for the city, and that's obviously the office part of the building. And I understand, yeah, I mean, it's a liquor store, and can we stick something else in there and make it abatable? I just think, I don't think so in the application. I think it's ambiguous, but once the resolution's granted, I don't think there's any problem with its current use, understanding that it is ambiguous.
Well, you and I will,
Respectfully
you will
disagree.
respectfully disagree on this because my interpretation of that statute is that you can't change horses midstream on it. I mean, under that interpretation, I could build a building and I could say I want it to be medical space. And then 3 years later, I want it to be a brothel, and now it's still medical space. It's not, it's an illegal use of the building. Yeah, I could put a massage parlor in. If Jeff decided to put a massage parlor in there, I don't think it would
So
be.
if I decide to go to, medical school, we're good?
Look, I mean,
If I
if you
apply,
want.
if I apply, we're good?
I was gonna say, go
I'm
ahead.
just asking, I'm asking, you're the
My
Your
interpretation,
would be good then, if
My-
I go to medical school?
Jeff, you gotta let me finish talking. My interpretation, which is different from your attorney's, and that's fine, is that it cannot be a prohibited use. Now, that being said, as I mentioned at the beginning of this, he's right. There's no cases that are interpreting this. There's no appellate decision that I can look to where a judge, because I did the same research he did before I made the recommendation the first time. I mean, I didn't just willy-nilly go, I don't like Jeff, get rid of his building. I mean, the analysis is the analysis. And his analysis is his analysis. And if we need to, we can go to a judge and ask the judge what the judge thinks of the thing. And the ad appellate process goes further to, you can take this all the way to the Indiana Supreme Court to make a decision as to whether or not this is, I mean, he has a legitimate argument that there is ambiguity in that statute. I don't read it. I read it the way I read it. He reads it the way he read it. You guys make your decision. That's ultimately what you are called to do as the designating body. So, I
agree.
think presented well.
Like Chris pointed out earlier, we have to do a resolution either way, what would be at our next meeting. But out of respect for everybody's time, and we have the rest of the meeting to get to this evening, are there any other questions or comments for this section of, or at this point in time? Or if somebody wants to point us in a direction as far as drafting of an ordinance or resolution, excuse me, then we can address that now. If not, we'll close the public hearing.
I have one, I'm curious as to why a document dated September 3rd is just now getting to us.
That would be my fault. I failed to put it in the packet, and I apologize.
So Chris, you got this on September 3rd, so you've
Yes.
had time to go through. I mean, everybody else, I really am probably in Vietta's court on most of this, if not all of agreeing with her comments. It just does trouble me that a document that is a month old, we're just now seeing it.
But I apologize for that as well. I mean, it was received, forwarded along, and I'll own that. I could have easily sent it to all of you as well. Yes, I have read the correspondence, and I've read his analysis, and I've checked his cases, and I've done all of those things. He and I simply disagree, and that's okay. But my analysis. But I don't know that I buy the resolution as a contract argument. I don't know that I do. I do, however, understand that if the majority of the building is in a conforming use, then it might be a conforming use. I do think that is an interesting argument, and I think it might have legs. I mean, if I was in his shoes and he was my client, this is the argument I would make. But I'm not. I'm in this seat, and this is the argument that I think what's best for the city of Greensburg is. So, I know that's being a bit wishy-washy, and I'm trying not to be, but that's where we're at. I read his letter, I looked at the cases, I see where his argument comes from, which is more than I can say from some letters and motions that I get from attorneys, so you guys can make your decision from that point. So, and I would also note, Kevin, just for your own edification, I don't think you can make this decision tonight. I think you have to make it in a public meeting. It's not on the current agenda, so I think it would have to be made at the November meeting. You have to open and close
What was,
the public.
we weren't on the agenda?
Your public hearing is,
Was, but
the vote on the determination of what's to happen at your public hearing is not on the agenda, nor would I expect it to be, because these folks need an opportunity to digest all of the things that they've just heard.
Well, yeah, they would if you'd have sent out the letter. No disrespect, sir. That was your responsibility for this meeting. Meanwhile, you keep me in limbo, and Mr. Cooley's a great guy. I'm tired of paying you.
I understand. I'll own my responsibilities.
If there are
If the council should want to amend the agenda when we arrive at that point to make a decision tonight, we could make that decision, but we would have to draft the resolution to conform to that, but you would probably want to review that before you agreed to it, if I were to recommend that. Anything else for the public hearing? Any further direction before our next meeting in this setting?
I want to grant the abatement, but I don't think we can go against our legal advice. And so I guess my opinion is that we would not grant the abatement or you draft a resolution to that effect. I want to, I think it's a bad call to go against your legal advice.
Are we gonna vote here?
I guess we're asking, so you're asking what our opinion is to move forward, right? So we're not voting, but we're asking what our opinion is.
So then a resolution to be drafted, can it be a resolution with a move forward or do not move forward vote? Or does it have to be one or the other, where we vote it up or we vote it down? And if we vote it down, does he have to wait another month? And then we have another resolution. How long do we want to drag this out, I guess is my question.
Well, I don't think it would be multiple months. I think you're either making a determination that reasonable efforts has been had or it hasn't, or that there's been extenuating circumstances or there hasn't. I do agree with Mr. Cooley. You do not have to give a 100% reduction. You can choose any amount of reduction on the spectrum. So in terms of what you would need to do at your next step, it's really a determination of, are you going to stick with essentially what you found as the recommendation from the abatement committee, that it was not in compliance, or are you going to find that reasonable efforts have been made or an extenuating circumstance warrants a finding of substantial compliance?
But my question is that two resolutions?
I would probably draft two resolutions just so that you have one or the other. You can just vote one up and then vote one.
So we could have two resolutions ready to be voted on at the November meeting?
Yeah, yes.
Because I hear one way and then I hear another way, and I think you understand where I'm going with that.
That would work for me.
Any further comments? Okay. Is there anyone else from the public here to speak on this topic? Seeing none, thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
We will take a motion to close the public hearing. Motion's been made by Darrell. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Rick. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed. Today is Monday, October 4th, the time being 7:45 p.m. due to a longer public hearing. The meeting of the Greensburg City Council is called to order at this time. Please silence electronic devices. To comply with Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the city requests that participants in this meeting complete a voluntary anonymous survey that's on a table in the back of the room. Amy, would you please call the roll?
Cain,
Here.
Kevin Fleetwood,
Here.
Rick Ensweller,
Here.
Darrell Poling,
Here.
Diana McKenzie. Here.
You all should have received a copy of the minutes, executive session, September 7, 2021. Any additions, edits, or corrections to those? If not, we take a motion to approve.
So moved.
Second.
Motion's been made by Kevin, seconded by Jamie. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, you have the meetings for September 7th. Any additions? If not, we take a motion to approve.
So moved.
Second.
Motion's been made by Jamie, seconded by Daryl. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
We have a special,
I'm gonna abstain since I was not here for the entire meeting.
okay. Kevin will abstain.
I showed up late.
Okay. We have a special session of September 20th, 2021. You all received a copy of those. All those, or is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Motion's been made by Kevin,
Second.
seconded by Jamie. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Okay, we have two old items of business, the 2021-16, which is the city's 2022 budget. We've had our budget workshops and had our first public reading, so this is the second and final reading. Any thoughts on that?
Motion to approve on the second reading.
Motion's been made by Jamie, is there a second? Seconded by Daryl. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? We have the 2021-17, which is the Greensburg Community School Corporation's 2022 budget. Superintendent Hunter is here. Should you have any questions? Tom, did you have anything you wanted to?
No.
No?
Make a motion we approve on the second reading.
Second.
Motion's been made by Jamie, seconded by Kevin. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Up next, we have Street Commissioner Mark Klosterkemper, Ordinance 2021-18, additional appropriation. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening. Neither one of these are actual asking for additional funding from the existing finances. What we did, we received 2 insurance reimbursement checks. One of them will go towards the repair of the light fixture at the corner of 10th and Lincoln for $14,556.42. The other one was we had a pickup truck that was involved in an accident and it was totaled, and we received a check from the insurance company for $36,913.14. But they go back into the fund and they have to be appropriated so I can use them to purchase replacement items that are needed for the ones that are damaged. So like I said, it's all current existing insurance funds, not taking anything from our cash reserves.
Any questions for Mark? If not, we take a motion to approve 2021-16.
So moved.
Second.
Motion's been made by Rick, seconded by Jamie. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
16 or 18?
I'm sorry, 2021-18. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Okay, thanks, Mark.
Thank you.
Up next, Utility Manager Donna Lecher. She has the water rate study and sewer rate study.
Good evening. Here to present the water and wastewater rate study is Brooke Shaley with 3D Financial. Thank you. They should all have a copy.
Hello. You should have a copy of the executive summaries and the reports of both the water and the sewer rate studies. For tonight, for time purposes, I will go over just the executive summaries of both of those rate studies. And then if you have any specific questions, we can dive into the report. The report's just large and has a lot of the details, but the summary hits the biggest portions that we would want to go over. I will start with the water rate study. Does everyone have that in front of them? So after looking over the books from Donna, which I will say, and we have said to the Water Board and the Board of Works, our books are excellent. So that was great. After going through everything, the rate increase would be 12.44% span over 3 phases for water. And what it is funding is your operational maintenance expenses, which does include an adjustment to add a GIS employee, which is split between sewer and the city and water. So that is divided up. And then a 3% inflationary rate increase. And how we did the 3% inflationary rate increase is we compounded that over the next 3 years to make sure that going into 2022 and 2023 and 2024, we're accounting for that 3% rate or inflationary increase, just to make sure we're staying up with inflation. So that is a part of the 12.44%. The biggest portion that this rate increase will fund is the capital improvement plan that you see on the bottom of the first page of that summary. which is a little over $3 million. This rate increase will allow you to fully fund your capital, which is huge. So the extensions and replacements that we are doing is based on a 2% composite depreciation factor, and it is the best way to be proactive on your capital needs. And the water utility is in a great financial position. It's going to allow you to not be reliant on debt, but still have the ability to go for debt if that is what is needed for larger projects down the line. So the main reason for this rate increase is for that capital improvement plan, which was drafted by the utility director, or utility superintendent, I'm sorry. So that is about $750,000 a year that we would transfer from operation to your depreciation fund to pay for those expenses on the capital improvement plan. Before I go any further, I know I kind of like hit really fast. Are there any questions about that so far? Okay. To go to be in compliance and to issue future debt, you do have to have, a utility is to always hold 125% coverage. With this rate increase, your percentage will exceed a little over 156%, so that is great at maintaining adequate coverage to be proactive down the line, or if a big expansion were to be needed, you are in that position to be able to fund those through debt, and also at the same time you're simultaneously funding your depreciation fund and growing that cash as well. So you have plenty of cash reserves, plenty of room for to issue new debt, and then if there were any business opportunities to come, that the utilities wouldn't have any hesitation to be able to take that on. So what will the average residential bill look like? The rate increase is just about $5.18. We are spanning that over 3 phases that will go into effect January 1st of 2022, 2023, and 2024. So the final phased-in rate on a residential bill averaging 4,000 gallons is $46.82. And we have a little graph to compare by population. We did do it by population just because that is a similar amount of ratepayers all paying into the same type of facility and capacity, so it's more comparable maybe to someone that's around this area but might be a lot smaller in size. So Greensburg sits right in the middle. Even at their 3rd phase, you can see it's kind of reaching towards the higher end, but what this graph does not take into account are all the other municipalities that are currently going through rate reports, doing the same process and raising those rates as well. So we obviously can't capture all of those, just what their current rates are. So Greensburg is doing great and just being proactive. This is something that Donna and the city has looked at every 3 years, so this is just your regular recurring rate study. And also within the water report, because you did just have a rate study done 3 years ago, this does include the adjustment of $183,000 that was collected through 2021 on the last phase of the last rate increase. So that is including that, so that way we are not over projecting the rate increase needed for this rate study. That is the biggest portion of it. There are some other smaller adjustments that we have included. For 2022, the utility receipts tax will go from 1.4% for a water utility to 1.46%. So we went ahead and included that as well, just to make sure we were encompassing any changes that we were aware of. It is minimal, but we just wanted to make sure we factored it in. So with all of those changes, the across-the-board rate increase is 12.44%. But like I said, we divided that into 3 phases, so it's a little over 3% per year on a bill. I know that's just a very high view of it, so if you guys had any questions or if you would like me to go through the water report, I am more than happy to do so on the larger packet.
Any questions for Brooke? This came with a unanimous recommendation to approve from the Water Board.
Is the addition of a GIS employee a want or a need?
This is something that is needed. We've been working on our GIS division. Currently, the wastewater absorbs that entire cost. And so with this, we've added a person to help with that division. We'll have somebody who's an outside tech kind of person and more of a computer, and then the coordinator would be more advanced in that. It's something that's been talked about for years and would be tremendously helpful, not only for utilities, but the fire department's currently working on a GIS project. Police use Spillman as part of theirs. This is part of the division of the future of government. We were on a call, Rick Denny's not here this evening, but we were on a call at the state. They asked us, and Donna was there too, they asked us how many feet of 8-inch pipe we had and how many feet of 6-inch pipe we had as part of a grant application process, and we couldn't tell them because we've not documented that. But with this kind of person, we can do a better job at that as well.
And if you flip to page 2 of the water report, you can see that adjustment on the forecasted statement is about $21,000 per year, which really in the grand scheme of things did not make a large impact on the rate increase. So, but you can see the breakdown of the salaries and